Don't believe the false evidence. Politics can't trump intelligence. Politics can't trump intelligence. So many things happen in our world that are created by a mob mentality. And by that I mean so many people get a hold of an idea, and whether they're telling the truth or whether they're telling an outrageous lie, people will believe them and follow them, and they will do all manner of things that are against the nature of themselves, because the nature of all of us is the nature of God. We're created in the image, the likeness of God, so we're part of the nature of God, God intelligence, God power, God spirit. We're all part of life. We know that. We're alive, and God is life. And we all know that we have the ability to love because God is love. So we know that all of these things that disturb our mind that we see in the world are not of the nature of God, because the nature of God is always good. Remember, Jesus said that I and the Father are one, so that means that we have the same nature as the Spirit, the intelligence, and the power that created us. And so we must understand this as we look at the things that we see in our world. The other night I watched with disbelief the CNN television program hosted by Don Lemon as he interviewed, or I should say listened to, two Trump supporters as they rattled off outright lies about illegal immigrants in the United States, both a product of misinformation and blatant willingness to ignore the human misery that their words implied, so much like the politicians. I have had people tell me they support political candidates who, when questioned, know little more than surface information about the candidate. We are in a time here in the United States that divisions between people have been fostered and cultivated by the politicians and the religious extremists, and with a blind eye to history, far too many people are allowing this consciousness to become ever more dominant in the race mind of the American people. For many people, especially non-Latinos, immigration reform is something that is not personal to them, and therefore they can be dismissive about it. But the extremists of the anti-immigrant circles are all too aware of this and are allowing this dismissive attitude to allow them to tell lies for truth. If we look back at the history of the rise in power of Hitler, we can see this same pattern of dehumanizing other people, especially Jews. To call illegal immigrants aliens is to dehumanize them. To call illegal immigrants aliens is to dehumanize them. To call children born in the United States of illegal immigrant parents anchor babies is to dehumanize them. It is an attempt to deprive them of their individuality and respect and their dignity. It is most dictionaries, dehumanize is defined as to deprive of human qualities or attributes, to divest of individuality. Isn't this what is happening in the current political discourse? Even the governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, himself born of illegal immigrant parents, is pro-deportation of children born of illegal immigrant parents. And Jeb Bush, who is married to a woman of Mexican descent, used the term anchor baby. This is where hate begins, and hate becomes dehumanizing in the minds of those who hate and in the minds of those too often who are hated. Far too many people are heard to say that Donald Trump is entertaining. But what a nice word for a man who is so blind to human kindness and the moral integrity to consider the consequences of his words and actions. Just how many people do you think who showed up in that sports stadium in Alabama to support and applaud Trump call themselves Christian? Is it the Christ in him that they were applauding? You know, we know better. We know better. We know that this is all political theater. It's all political theater, and too often and too much of it is political theater without any thoughts of consequences. Just like the two women that Don Lemon had on his program, they were talking about deporting all of these illegal immigrants and deporting their American-born children. And I thought, well, don't you remember, these were two black women, two young black women. Don't you remember the history of slavery? You know, slavery was too an economic issue, Slaves were brought here because they worked for free or they worked for their food and their shelter and their clothing, but it was economics. It was economics that brought them here. It was economics that dehumanized them. It was economics that held them in bondage. It was economics that caused people to sell the mothers away from the fathers and the fathers away from the mothers and the children away from both their parents, and to separate families and to dehumanize people and abuse people and treat them like somehow they were less than human. And even the laws of the land didn't even consider them to be human at the time. So how can we dismiss the history of all these ghoulish things that have happened in our history throughout the world and still consider the idea that someone like Donald Trump and his monstrous words of dehumanization of illegal immigrants is entertaining? Let's go to the Gospel of Matthew 15:14. These are words from the mastermind Jesus. Disregard them, they are blind guides. If a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall into a pit. And then we go to the prophet Isaiah 9:16. Those who guide this people mislead them, and those who are guided are led astray. That means when we are led to believe something, to act on something, to repeat something that is not of the nature of God, we are being led astray. And let's look at the Apostle John. This is from 1 John 4:20. This is the apostle that Jesus loved. If anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. I don't care what race, creed, color, nationality, religion, sexual orientation, whatever it may be. Those are just surface things that separate us. We are all spirit. Our soul is of the same nature. It is of the nature of God. And if we cannot love the brother we have seen, we cannot love the God whom we have not seen. And anything said to the contrary is just so much foolishness, so much foolishness. Let's look at these words from Martin Niemöller, who lived from 1892 to 1984. He was a prominent Protestant pastor who emerged as an outspoken public enemy of Adolf Hitler and spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camps. He wrote, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." That's from Martin Niemöller, a prominent Protestant pastor who emerged as an outspoken public foe of Adolf Hitler and spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule and concentration camp. When we let people divide us and separate us from each other, we are allowing them to divide us and separate us from each other, from God. We live in a world that history has proven that the impossible can become possible. Who would have thought Hitler was almost a reject, that he could do what he did. That was the impossible that became possible. So both the positive and the negatives can become possible even when they seem impossible. Here in the United States, we have 11 million illegal immigrants, families, co-workers, neighbors, and friends who have lived in the shadows in fear because our government, which was established by immigrants, has failed to treat them with dignity and respect. And yes, there are illegal immigrants who have committed violent crimes, but so few in comparison to the violent crimes committed by American citizens. But we don't judge everybody by the wrongs of the few. So we have a justice system that judges the individual, not groups, not a whole body of people. And let's take it into our mind. How much joy do we want to feel in our life? How much peace do we want to realize in our lifetime? How much prosperity do we want to achieve in our lives? Because whatever we want for someone else, that's what we're going to get for ourselves. To love your neighbor as yourself means to want whatever good you want for yourself, for your neighbor. And that we don't get anything by taking something away from someone else. The two women on the Don Lemon show were saying, well, if the illegals were deported and their children were deported with them, there would be all these jobs for people. Well, I don't know how many people you think would be lined up to pick lettuce or to pick carrots or to pick watermelons in 118 degrees in the San Joaquin Valley. But I don't know too many people that will. I know that all the farmers, all the people who produce the foods, the vegetables and the grapes and all those things are always begging for people, and they can't get enough people that some have even moved their businesses to Mexico because they can't get people here to work. The jobs are there, but people won't take them. The jobs are there, but people won't move to where the jobs are. So don't blame the people who do the jobs. Look within your own mind, look within your own heart, look within your own soul and say, what can I do more of to create a greater prosperity in my life? How can I let the infinite intelligence of God guide me, direct me to where I can be prospered and healed and blessed rather than looking to take something away from someone else? Disregard them, they are blind guides, Jesus said. If a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall into a pit. We don't need any more chaos in our country. Those who guide people, those who guide this people mislead them, and those who are guided are led astray. We read from the prophet Isaiah, and those words are just as true today as they were back in those primitive times. So many people get all excited and all passionate about the wrong things, not thinking about all the consequences that happen for all of us. This is the spiritual world we live in. Don't be fooled by the material. God is spirit, omnipresent. God is spirit, omnipotent. God is spirit, omniscient, all power, all intelligence, all present. And God's law is the law of everything in the universe, moves through everything in the universe. But don't let the people fool you into believing that there's power out there. There is no power out there. And yes, Hitler did what he did, but who would want to be a Hitler? Who would want to have that consciousness, to live with that hate in their mind and their heart and their soul? But Hitler did tell us that even that which seems incredible and impossible is possible if we're led by the wrong people. We're led into an unconscious acceptance of lies and half-truths and false ideals. So both major political parties in the United States are guilty. Both major political parties in the United States are guilty of using immigration reform as a wedge issue with no real passion for reform or change. And so we can come to the conclusion that politicians can't be depended on to resolve this issue. Only a change in the collective consciousness of the people in this country will cause the solution to be realized. As we change this collective consciousness one individual at a time, when the consciousness of Americans is lifted to the level of justice and brotherly love that Martin Niemöller possessed, the politicians will be forced to elevate their consciousness too. Why? Because love, intelligence, power, and unity are already available to us through the presence of God, infinite spirit. We just must stop believing the false evidence and know that politics can't trump God intelligence. Politics can't trump God love. Politics can't trump the power and the spirit of God, and let the love of God reign supreme in our mind, our heart, and our souls, and then let the law of God delight in changing the world in which we live. The world in which we live. But we must keep faith with God. We must keep faith with the only power there really is. And that is the law of God, the power of God. We must keep faith with it and realize within ourselves that nothing in this world is as powerful as God's love and God's law. That if we allow ourselves to believe that somehow we can get more by taking something away from someone else, that we can find peace and harmony and joy by creating chaos in the lives of other people, and we are kidding ourselves. We are kidding ourselves. We are being foolish in our recognition of life. The things which are impossible for men are possible with God. Jesus tells us in the Gospel of Luke, the things that are impossible for mankind are possible with God. And Jesus tells us, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. More abundantly. So that's why we're all seeking that more abundant life. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not upon thine own understanding. We can do this as we renew a right spirit within us, within our own mind, our own heart, and our own soul. But we must know that there's something greater going on in our world than all the nonsense that the politicians and the religious extremists will have us to believe. The kingdom of God is within you. How many people understand that? How many people understand that we must look to that within us? Look to the power of God within us. Not within our body, not within our brain, within our mind, within that invisible substance of us that gives us our personality, that gives us our reasoning, that gives us our intelligence, that gives us the spirit in which we live our lives. God is the refuge and strength. Our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. So when we don't understand things, turn to God. Turn to God and say, what is the truth in this? What is the consequence in this? How does this make us better as a people? How does this make me better as a person? And we can learn from God. Incline your ear and come unto me, hear, and your soul shall live. We can read in the book of Isaiah. Incline your ear and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live. What is it we need to hear? We need to hear how the power of God's love can move through our mind, our heart, and our soul and create a greater understanding, a greater recognition, a greater realization of what it is that we want to see in our world, what it is that we want to experience in our world. Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. So let's don't be afraid to speak the truth. Let's don't be afraid to speak up. Let's don't be afraid to stop the nonsense, to stop the hate, to stop the divisiveness, to stop the noise and the nonsense of the world from the media and from the politicians that want to separate us and divide us and make somebody the enemy. Our enemies are those who want to destroy the world, not those who want to work hard and create a better life for themselves. So let's go back to those words of Martin Niemöller. Once again, I'll remind you, he was a prominent Protestant pastor who emerged as an outspoken public foe of Adolf Hitler and spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camps. He said, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So who are we allowing ourselves to dismiss? You know, immigration reform is not something that can be dismissed. There's 11 million people living in the shadows, people who are working hard, people by and large who only want a better life for themselves and their children, and who doesn't want that? There are over 40 million people of Latino descent in this country. But the greatest number of illegal immigrants, surprisingly enough, since 2010, are from Asian countries. They're not even coming across the southern border of Mexico. The southern border of Mexico, where the United States meets Mexico, I should say. So amazingly enough, the politicians don't tell you that, because it's a bit more difficult for people to understand the lax control of immigration when they start thinking about Asians coming here and staying over their visas and not returning back to where they live. It's much easier for them to show you pictures of people coming over a fence or saying they're going to build a big wall and spend millions and millions of taxpayer dollars wasted on that kind of nonsense, rather than trying to find real solutions that bring us together, not only as a people, not only as countries, but as a world. We need a global solution. Immigration is not just a problem in the United States. Migrants are not just a problem in the United States. It's a global issue that needs to be resolved. And intelligent people will seek the solution rather than seeking to shame or blame or to point the finger or to take away from someone else, especially their dignity and their respect. So we must look to Jesus. Jesus said, love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And equally important, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Disregard them. They are blind guides if they are guiding you against the nature of God. If a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall into a ditch. And the prophet Isaiah tells us those who guide this people mislead them, and those who are guided are led astray. Don't be led astray from the being a part of the nature of God, because that is your true nature, that is my true nature, that is the true nature of everyone. And so it is. Amen.